Good evening and welcome to the Star Chamber Show live podcast. It is a great Wednesday evening here in Central Kentucky, where I, Stephen Zimmer, am broadcasting from. And we have a great episode for you tonight. Definitely, if you have any creative friends that are in the mystery, thriller, suspense genres, filmmakers, authors, those types, or you're into true crime, you're definitely not going to want to miss tonight's guests. And we will be getting to tonight's guests in just a few minutes after we go through some preliminary updates and some other news. And of course, welcome aboard our co-hosts. I've got two co-hosts coming aboard. One, the amazing, the awesome Metal Bek Harrison, who I think is online with me right now.
Hello.
There you are, Beck. Good to see you.
Good to see you.
Hear you. Yes, I just saw you, but yeah, they actually hear you. So yeah, we're in the same building, but we're just in separate rooms, just so we don't cross wires on the the feedback and all that good stuff. But we will also be joined by the loquacious, the vivacious, the amazing Holly Phillippe here in just a few minutes. She will be coming aboard. And so, yeah, we will have three of us tonight. And definitely, I know Beck and I know Holly are especially excited, being that they are big true crime fans. So, yeah, this is going to be fun. It's going to be fun. I think Holly just logged in.
Excited.
Yeah, Holly, I think you're in.
Yes, I'm here.
There you
I
are.
was looking up something real quick because this show here is going to be very interesting, very exciting. Any of you mystery thriller authors or true crime
Yep.
followers or nonfiction writers, documentary freaks, you're going to love this show.
Yes, you are. And I just mentioned that right before you logged in. I was saying if you knew any creatives that are into those genres, to definitely get a hold of them now. You got about 13 minutes before our guest
Yes, if
comes
they
on.
actually want to ask
So
him
yes.
some questions and pick his brain live. I know we're going to get a lot of listens on the other platforms once the show is recorded.
Yes.
We will have a lot of downloads. I'm going to be
Mhm.
sharing it like crazy. I think this show is very important. It's going to shed light on a few things. And it's very important because any of us could be accused of something, and if you don't have evidence, you shouldn't be able to be prosecuted.
Right.
It's
And
also important for those that are still being accused of things that need a voice. So I hope we can
Right.
be out there for everybody. So yes, we need everybody to listen tonight.
yes, definitely. And the chat room is open, folks. So go ahead and participate on, of course, the Podbean app is your gateway to the chat room. That's the best place to do it. Using the Podbean app. Of course, as Holly mentioned, we are carried on all kinds of platforms, usually about the day after the live broadcast, and that includes YouTube and Spotify, Amazon, iHeartRadio, and all the places a lot of people get their podcasts. So we're available on all of them, and definitely give a shout out to Dewan Hearn, who just entered the chat room. Good to see you, Dewan, and yes, folks, it's going to be a really, really good night. But we do have some good news for you to give you on the Imaginarium front, because the Star Chamber show is affiliated with the Imaginarium Convention, where your imagination is the foundation. And we have a flurry of updates because we had a very busy week. Last show, of course, we announced to you that we have the wonderful Heather Graham and Jonathan Mayberry as our guests of honor. Both of them are just absolutely incredible individuals, and this was a huge announcement for the convention. But since then, we have added several more guests, and we announced that award-winning author and editor, Bram Stoker award-winning author and editor, Michael Nost, is returning as our Toastmaster. Of course, love Michael Nost, definitely part of the Imaginarium family, and is also part of the inaugural 2025 inductee class of the Imaginarium Hall of Fame. So that was a great announcement. Then, as spotlighted guests, we have announced author and publicist Dan Klefstad, who is really making waves with his new DIY book promo. And also, he has the great vampire novel, Fiona's Guardians. And of course, we did talk about his new podcast, Vamp Chat with Dan and Ava, which is he does with Ava Vertris, author Ava Vertris, also
Eva.
on Podbean. And then we also have the amazing, who just comes up with some of the best ideas for interactive panels. James Sabata, award-winning author, editor, screenwriter, and podcaster, and one of our favorite people around. The great guy, and we just announced him. And then we also, so today we announced two new faces to Imaginarium who are coming as official panelists. Our author, marketer, and content coach Jessica Starks, and author, editor, publisher Tobin Elliott. And definitely excited about having both Jessica and Tobin here. And they are, like I said, first time guests to Imaginarium. And then last but not least, last bit of news I have to give you is that the discounted hotel room block for the convention is now open for reservation. There is, under the hotel menu choice on the main site, there is a link that will take you directly to the reservation page and get you the discounted rate for Imaginarium in our room blocks. So, yes, that is open now, and definitely check that out. And with all of this, I mean, we are going to be working hard to get some great Imaginator guests. We've got some good people that we're discussing, really, really good people we're discussing right now. And we're also looking to get some print materials out and spread around to promote Imaginarium in September. So, if you are inclined, please do look at our sponsorships. We have several levels of main sponsorship, and then we have our individual patron level. But that will help us a lot, both with bringing in new guests and also with the print materials. So, yes, now is a great time if you want to come aboard, and you'll also get more promotion for yourself because, of course, you have a presence on our site throughout the year and into next year and leading all the way up to Imaginarium. And we are going to be making posts, but we are welcoming back both Hydra Publications and Per Bostet Publications, as both are going to be coming back to us as part of our official sponsor family for 2025. So, we have a bit of good news there to pass along. So, any updates on your end, Holly, before we get to the folks that brought you tonight's show?
No.
No updates. All right.
I am stuck. Let me tell you all a little bit. I am stuck in Indiana until the end of October because my mother, that's 89, broke her leg. So I am up here and I'm still working though, mind you. We're still keeping the podcast going. I'm still vetting guests. I'm still doing my research, and I'm working on Imaginarium things. I'm working on press things and editing. And yeah, Stephen got some exciting news today too. I turned over his book to him. I don't know
Yes,
if he's seen the email. Did you see that?
not yet, but I've been so busy today.
Surprise!
I've been buried in editing work
Well,
myself
honey,
on other people.
you have a new book
Well,
in the
excellent.
pipeline that I just completed.
Well, how about that? And well, I know what it is. Then it should be Rise of the Voyagers, second book in the Faraway
Correct.
saga, which is YA dystopian. And yes, I've been very eager to get this one out. So yeah, that's great news. Thank you. And yeah, folks, I'm getting a live update right here with you on the show.
There you go.
How cool is that?
An editor update.
An editor update. Yeah, and if Clayton was in the chat room, I'd be able to tell him. Yeah, he's got one coming, I think, tomorrow. And it's a short story collection. That's all I think I'm at liberty to say. But yeah, it is a great collection, and Clayton's a great writer. But yeah, he just the last story I edited in it today, I finished up on at least, was one that really got me in the feels. It has a lot of depth, so I was like, want to give him live kudos if he happened to be in the chat room, but he is not, as far as I can see, just yet. So yeah, Clayton, he's fun. Of course, most folks know them as part of the Lemure Throne. Yes, you heard that right, Lemure Throne at Imaginarium. When Holly and I even brought him a stuffed lemur that they use as their mascot at that table. It's a lot of fun.
His name is Mew.
And there's already more of them coming. Next, the lemurs have expanded. There's more of them coming
Yes.
next.
2 tables now.
Three. He's gotten 3. So
Oh, now there's 3?
there are 3.
Well, then I'm going to have to update that
Yeah,
because as of today, I knew of two.
no, he got three. He's got three in all.
He is a crazy man. Watch them lemurs. They're a
Yeah, they're.
wild bunch. They're taking over.
I know Mark Avery and Joe Eisenberg are two of the others, and then I know
Paige,
Paige
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 Zappa, Paige
Paige
Zappa.
Zaplendam. Yeah, Paige
Yes,
Zaplendam.
she's
Who
one.
I'd love to have her Imaginarium because I'm no longer alone in the Z part of the guest list. There's another Z.
There
Finally.
is.
It's, yeah, so
And I can never say her name. Bless her heart. I just call her Paige Z,
it's a
and that's good enough.
fun name. Zaplendam. It's a fun name to say.
It
Yes.
reminds me of like Frank Zappa, you know?
It could, yeah, it makes you think of that a little bit. But yeah, she's a science fiction writer and really, really talented, and was wonderful to have her last year at the convention. And yeah, she is back, coming back next year with the Lemur Army. So it's gonna be great.
Dang lemurs.
But looking at the clock here, let's go ahead and recognize tonight's folks that brought you the show. Of course, Sandy Lender, the genre blender. Of course, get out there and get her new Duran Duran book that is out this month. You definitely want a copy of that. Tonight, she's going to tell you in her spot a little bit more about something else. And then also, of course, the great Ren Garcia, who asked the famous question at the end. And here's a little bit from Ren first.
The League of Elder dares to be unusual. It's easy to be swept away in this bold and uninhibited landscape where fantastic heroes become old friends and sinister villains inhabit every dark corner. Dare to explore things best left alone. Each book is your lantern, lighting the path to a world never before seen. So what do you say? Are you weird enough for us?
Most definitely, Ren. And thank you as always. And yes, we're going to start a campaign to get you out next summer to see us in person. And also bringing you tonight's show, of course, the great Sandy Lender, the genre blender. And here's a little bit from her with another project. But yes, like I said, go out and get that new Duran Duran book. It's awesome. Here's a little bit from Sandy.
What happens when you accidentally schedule a Krampus movie on the Hallmark Channel? You get Silver Bells by Sandy Lender. Silver Bells is a Christmas horror story, and it will be available in print and ebook on Friday, the 13th of September, just in time for Halloween and Christmas greetings. Join Sandy during her online tour for Silver Bells during September. Then join the mature main character, Ivy Light, as she navigates the paranormal upset of spiritual warfare at Reindeer Creek. Finally, join the mayhem of Silver Bells by Sandy Lender when you pre-order and purchase your copy on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and all your favorite e-platforms.
Well, thank you, Sandy Lender. And yes, that is going to be an amazing title. I knew about it, but I couldn't tell you all publicly yet. But now she has definitely gone public, so I can say, yes, it's an amazing, amazing book. And yes, Sandy Lender releasing a horror novel in time for Halloween. How cool is that? Like I said, she does about every genre you can possibly think of. Yeah, she does it all. Right, Beck? Yeah, she's
Yes,
impressed.
he does. We love our Sandy.
Yes,
Yep.
we do.
Yes, we do, and I've got a hard copy of that book, and I got an advanced copy because I'm going to be giving her a blurb on it, and so yeah, definitely, yeah, I know that Beck and Holly are both going to be trying to lift that off me pretty shortly, so I need to yeah finish it up and get that out.
Time's a ticking, Stephen. Time's a ticking.
Yeah, because it does exist in the house. It does exist here. So yeah, we're getting ready to bring our guest aboard. So we have anything in the chat room that we need to quickly pass along from our listeners? Anything you all noticed?
I don't think
No,
so.
we have a Dan fan in there, and I'm a new listener. Hog Talica, love the name,
Yes.
love the
Oh,
name.
love the name.
I'll give him a shout out or her.
Yeah, I love the name. That is fantastic. Yeah, we could definitely pay attention to screen names, and that is cool. That is cool. Of course, yeah, we both Holly and I are, and of course Beck love lean toward the metal side of things in our music. So anytime we see that Talica suffix, we know what you're talking about.
Dangerous people. Dangerous people.
Oh, definitely, definitely. So yes, folks, it's getting about the time for us to bring on our guests. So I'm just looking in for the call in, and we will be bringing you that in just a moment. So I'm watching out for that, Holly.
Did you happen to pass the link
Yes. Oh
along?
yes,
Okay.
yes, yes, I sure did, and I wouldn't forget to do that. That's-
I did not
I'm on
think
top
so,
of things.
but we are busy individuals.
I'm on top of things. No, I did send that out, and
Okay.
so hopefully, but you might check on your end too to see if you got any
I am trying to do
messages.
so. I am trying.
See if you got any last minute messages. Yeah, because Holly
Yeah.
is. But Holly has been the one that has been in touch with tonight's guest mostly. So, but and we'll go over here and see here. And yes, yes, Beck. I've seen looking at some of the chat room comments. Yes, I also love Krampus. Yeah, that's of course in reference to Sandy Lender's new book. And then we have yes, and he is a Metallica fan. Hogtalica is indeed a Metallica fan. That's
Yes, and I do want to bring it up. We were talking about, I was making a comment because back in, like he was saying, 93, when the Memphis 3, if you all don't know the story, I'll give you a little background while I'm trying to get into the email, which is not working. Um, my computer's decided not to work at all. Um, Anywho, the Memphis 3 were three teenagers that were convicted wrongly, mind you. No evidence, no proof. They were convicted of a murder of three second graders back in 1993. And it was brought up in court because Damien, the main um, suspect, that they profiled, mind you, they did so because he wore black. He was dabbling in like some witchcraft, but he was looking at the Wiccan side of things, which is nature. I'm a Christian Wiccan myself. Um, it's not Satan worship by any means, but they profiled him as a Satan worshiper because, oh, he's looking at witchcraft. He wears black. He listens to Metallica. Oh, and Blue Oyster Cult, God forbid. And he reads Stephen King books. Ooh. So that must mean he's a killer. And that's the way they looked at things. And as we know today, that would make all of us suspects because we all enjoy horror. You know, and a bunch of us write horror. Stephen writes horror. We listen to Metallica. We wear black a lot. I do study Wiccan, and so yeah, it would literally profile us all.
well, we're in
And
trouble because I have the entire Blue Oyster Cult discography on CD.
oh
So
well, God
and
forbid,
and I read
you would have
Stephen
been a
King.
murderer.
And adding to
Yeah.
bringing that even more home, Stephen King is latest one of his latest releases is of course titled Holly. So that's pretty suspicious there. Stephen King with
I'm actually looking at that book right now.
the
It's
novel
sitting in front
Holly.
of me.
Oh yeah, you're in my bedroom because I'm in Indiana. So Beck is in my room right now doing the
Yep.
podcast in Kentucky. So yeah, she's actually looking at that book. I have a lot of books
Right
up there
now,
that would be,
yes.
would be considered. Oh, I would be profiled. Yeah, it was during the Satanic Panic. If you all remember the Satanic Panic, um, they were blaming like everything, and it just so happened these three kids were friends, ran around together. Um, and did all this. So they accused him of these crimes. Now these crimes were hideous, and I'm not going to go into the full
We're not going to go to that
aspects.
yet.
You all can do your own research on the three young victims, but it was brutal, and they were found in a ditch, just discarded in a ditch. There was no like blood trail around there, so there's no way they were actually murdered on the scene. They had to be dumped there, or there's no way you could have washed away that much blood. Uh, any research, any thriller writer or, author in true crime could tell you, there is no way you're cleaning up that much blood that quickly. That's not happening, especially with 3 of them. That no evidence. They had no evidence whatsoever. There was no DNA evidence. There was no evidence putting them at the scene. Nothing. They didn't even know these kids.
They just had
So there was,
hearsay.
it's
They
all
had
hearsay.
hearsay from a bunch of people who did not like them because they were not your average kids. And they did not like that.
They were considered weird and ignatum, and so they were like, oh, they're different. They're weird, you know.
Definitely, and yeah, that I remember that time well. Yeah, there definitely was a lot of that. I mean, even I got I got interrogated a few times by some folks about the fact that I listened to heavy metal frequently, even though I was probably very model kid at the time, and I wasn't getting into trouble or anything like that. But oh Lord, there a lot of concern if you listen to heavy metal and things like that. There's definitely a thing about that, and going on at the time. So, hey, do you have any updates, Holly, on messages, anything like that? Because I don't see our guest just yet. So, do you have any messages? Have you been able to check the email box, Holly? Nope, she did.
Yeah, I'm here. I was working on something. I'm trying to get a hold of Dan.
Okay. So,
Yeah.
you're just checking away. Okay.
Yeah. So I'm just trying to fill people in. There is, if you want to do some more research upon this after the show, there is a great documentary on HBO Max. It's called Max now, called Paradise Lost. And it covers the trial. It covers the aftermath. The 3 suspects were in prison for 27 years. It took 27 years to get this resolved, to get them out. And like me and Bek was just talking, they had to admit there was a certain bylaw in Arkansas that they had them say they were guilty, even though they're innocent, and still maintain and claim their innocence. But they had to say, I'm guilty, to let them out of jail. 27 years later. And Damien was on death row for 27 years. These kids were 17 and 16. 2 of them were 16, one was 17, when they went into prison. They've lost their lives. Damien had a son he never got to see grow up. He never got to be in his life at all. And that's criminal. It's the whole thing was criminal. They have never received any compensation from the state. They've tried to get the courts to actually do more research and DNA on what they do have left of the evidence, because some of it conveniently was lost. Okay. You can make your mind up on that. It was lost by the police. So it's gone. So they can't even recover some of the blood evidence because it doesn't exist anymore. It's gone. But they're trying to fight for it. They keep getting turned down, but they're trying. Damien and the Eccles, he's trying to fight to get things overturned to where they can use the new DNA that we have now. Because obviously since 93, we've come a long way.
Right.
And so if they go back and look at things now, it's going to be a much different outcome. They did do enough DNA to where that's why they were released, is because all of the DNA samples that they did have, none of them matched any of those three suspects. Not one.
But they
So,
still have to maintain that they're guilty, even though they're not guilty, and that's what's so sad about it.
hmm hmm it is. It's
It's sad that they're out there walking around free, but yet they're not free. Because
right.
Yeah.
until we figure out who actually did it, those poor boys, men now, are never really going to be free.
No, because they're always going to have this looking over their head. They're convicted murderers, found guilty, two juries, and so this is something that's always going to loom over them, which is very tragic because I honestly believe, and you could make your own mind up, but I honestly believe that they had nothing to do with any of this. There's no proof.
They didn't. I don't believe they did. And like someone said in the chat, they won't be free from the psychological abuse or anything that's happened since they were teenagers. They will not forget what happened to them behind bars. They won't forget what they have missed out on. Damien won't forget that he didn't get to watch his child grow up. You can't get any of that back.
Mm-hmm.
No. Oh, here he is. Okay, I've got an email. Let me open this up here.
Okay, we'll find out. We'll get them on
Okay.
here. This is happening.
I'm going to call Dan. So, you guys chat. I'm going to make a phone call right now.
Okay, you got it. Well, this happens, folks, every once in a while. Yeah, sometimes you have a connection issue or this or that, and when you're doing a live broadcast, there's always a chance of adventure. But Holly does have his phone number, and she's going to be working to get in touch with him. So bear with us. But yes, But Bek, I don't want to interrupt your all's thoughts, but what as far as what you were talking about, because I'm looking at this from a number of angles and things that bother me. Topics that we're going to discuss tonight, like false confessions and why they occur sometimes and how they occur. And there's definitely wrongful convictions. Just because, a jury in a court sometimes to pronounce a guilty verdict does not necessarily mean that someone is truly guilty. And
Right.
I've seen that all through the years. Stuff that, are people, and then of course the plea bargain is something that I've always been really bothered by sometimes as far as
Well, I
plea
think the
bargains.
saddest thing with this was they interrogated one of them for 12 hours straight until he just finally cracked, and gave them a false confession. He just couldn't take it anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And they only played the last 45 minutes of the interrogation. Well, that's all the jury needed.
Right.
And they didn't have nobody else in that room with them. They didn't have no guardian. Those boys were minors. I don't know how they got by with that, but they did. They just wanted a conviction because they couldn't find nobody. So they found these poor 3 boys that weren't popular, and they put it on them. They didn't care how. They just needed to lock somebody up.
Yeah, and that happens a lot of times when you don't have resources. Because definitely, when the
90s,
state
when the
state prosecutes you, the state has all the resources in the world. So yeah, if you're coming at it from the other angle, sometimes you don't have the resources to fight the system, and that's why a lot of people enter into plea bargains because they know they can't just simply fight the charges. They can't afford to defend themselves properly, so they'll take a plea bargain to get a lesser penalty than what they might be facing. And so it doesn't, like I said, doesn't always mean that everybody's innocent that does that. But there are a lot of cases where that happens. A lot of cases where somebody does do something like that. And that doesn't directly relate to this case exactly, but just speaking in general about the topic of wrongful convictions. I think that definitely enters the conversation.
Well, because there's been convictions that have been wrongful, and then there's been people that's done the crime and they've walked away free. So, and in this case, though, I truly believe these boys, they did not do this. I've watched a lot of documentaries. I've led my true crime since I think I could read.
No,
And,
not you, Beck.
and I fully believe that these boys are innocent, that they did not do this.
Yeah, you truly could do your own true. Yeah, folks, Beck could truly do her own true crime podcast with Holly. Yeah, they both could because they are deep in this topic.
They are 100% innocent, and I will stand by that.
Yes, yeah, they are. So let's see here. Just checking on a couple messages here while we are talking, and just seeing where Holly might be coming along. Just seeing if we got a message just yet. Yeah, I know she's trying to establish a connection here. That's what's going on with tonight's guest. So hopefully she'll pop up here in a second, but it won't be. I don't think it'll be too much longer. So bear with us. But yeah, we're going to be touching on the wrongful conviction aspect and things like that tonight for sure.
So many different cases too, not just with them, but so many different cases.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and then the topic of we'll touch on the topic of criminal justice reform. Definitely want to address that as far as going forward and how you can avoid this in the future. Of course, Holly already did mention about the new, current DNA testing is definitely straightening out some of these cases, which is good to see.
To get a decent DNA, but we're in 2024 now.
Yeah,
and I would love for these three men to be able just to live out knowing I was telling the truth. We did not do this.
Okay, it looks like I think we do have our guest, so I'm going to get his mic on after a quick introduction and bring him aboard. But tonight's guest is an author and an Arkansas District Court judge. And during his 20 years in private law practice, he was deeply involved in the case that we have just been discussing, one of the most well-known murder trials in American history, the triple homicide of 3 8-year-old boys in West Memphis, Arkansas in 1993. And that is the subject of his new book, A Harvest of Innocence. So it is my honor, and I'm very excited to bring aboard the Star Chamber Show for the very first time, Dan Stidham. And Dan, great to have you. Hopefully we got a connection here now.
I do too. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, Dan, we have you. Yes,
hi, Dan.
Success. Welcome.
Try a triple homicide murder case, but I can't connect to my podcast.
It happens.
I apologize. I was sitting there hitting the link and it just wasn't working for me.
Trust me,
that happens sometimes.
I do this all the time, Dan. It happens to me at times. We understand.
A live show. Yeah, that's what happens. We have little technical things. We've even had tornadoes, Dan.
Oh gosh.
Yep.
Just so you know, we don't have tornadoes happening tonight. We're clear of that. But it is great to have you. And I know that Holly and Beck, they're both heavy into true crime, and then I'm a writer myself. I mean, we really thank you for coming aboard. And yes, I'm really looking forward to reading your new book, A Harvest of Innocence. And so I think that's probably where we'll start the conversation. And then we'll get into some of the topics surrounding it. But yeah, congratulations on the book, and definitely tell us about what folks can find in it.
Well, folks will be able to find nearly 100 things that have never been brought to light in the public realm. And this is the book the state of Arkansas did not want me to write. They wanted to sweep this under the rug and let it go away, and I refuse to do that. And I've been working on this project a little over 10 years.
Wow.
But part of the Alford plea, which I'll be happy to discuss and explain a little later, they had a 10-year suspended imposition of sentence attached to that Alford plea. So if they got into trouble, major trouble of any sort, then they could go back to prison. And so I didn't want to write this book until that 10 years had expired.
I get that. And the Alford plea, ladies and gentlemen, is what we were talking about prior to Dan coming on, where they have they had to plead guilty, but still maintain their innocence to even get out of jail.
That's
So
exactly right.
yeah, and that boggles my mind.
My
It
mind. Yeah.
absolutely boggles my mind. Is that legal? Is that like a federal law, or is that just an Arkansas
It's
law?
actually from the case Alford versus North Carolina.
Okay.
And so it's passed muster all the way up the chain of the appellate courts. And it was an older case than I thought it would be. I'd never heard of it before. I was not the architect of the plea. I think I was probably the last person on the planet to know that it was happening. At that point in 2011, I was a witness in the case, no longer acting as an attorney. And so I get a phone call the night before from the newly elected prosecutor, Scott Ellington, and he said, "Hey, your boy's getting out tomorrow." And I said, "What are you talking about?" And he said, "Mr. Miscali and the others, they're getting out of prison." And I said, "Tell me what's going on." And he said, "Well, it's called an Alford plea, and that's all I know." And so I thought, there's been so many times in this case that we've just almost got there, and the rug would be pulled out from under us, or I'd be thrown under the bus, or kicked in the teeth, or knocked down. And it's just, I just was in that I'll see it when I believe it mode. And so I quickly called John Phillippe, who is one of the appellate lawyers who represents Jason Baldwin. And I called him and I said, "Hey, what's going on tomorrow?" And he said, "Well, what you've heard is true, and it's nauseating, but it's going to happen. I'm in the middle of a capital murder case here in California, and I can't really get into details. I can later, but right now the judge won't even let me call Jason."
Wow.
So he said, "We'll catch up later," and then it lasted about 45 seconds at most. But I still didn't realize what was going on. All I knew for sure is that my client was going to walk out of prison the next day a free man, and that's the promise I made to him the day he was convicted in February of 1994.
But then you didn't even get to speak to him prior to the release.
Actually, I did.
You did.
That's the first thing I did when I got to the courthouse that morning. Is I went into where they were holding the West Memphis 3, and I got stopped by a court security officer, and he said, "Your Honor, we can't let you in here unless you have Judge Laser's approval." And I said, "Okay, I'll go talk to the judge." And so I stuck my head in Judge Laser's chamber, and he said, "Well, I don't care, but you need to get Jeff Rosenzweig, who was Jesse's appellate lawyer and still is, get his permission." And so I turned to walk away to go find Jeff, and Judge Laser said, "Dan," he said, "you're not going to try to derail this train, are you?" And I said, "Why would I do that? My client's going home."
Right.
Um,
Right.
so I go downstairs, the floor, and find all the lawyers putting the last minute details on the plea documents. And I pulled Jeff to the side and I said, "Do you care if I visit with Jesse for a few minutes?" He said, "No, I don't care." I said, "Well, Judge Laser wanted me to ask your permission." And so he said, "Sure." And as I turned to walk away again, he said, "Dan, you know we were going to get a new trial, right?" And I said, "Well, yeah, we all thought we were.
Right. That's what
completely
you were going
destroyed
for.
we completely destroyed the state's case. There's no way they can resurrect it." And it just dawned on, why are we doing this if we're going to get a new trial? And so it was all kind of confusing, but the one absolute that I knew was that my client was going home that day. And I was able to keep that promise that when I made it, I wasn't sure I was going to be able to keep it. So I was elated, actually. And so I go upstairs and told the court security officer that I had permission from everybody I needed, and he let me in. and there was about 8 bailiffs guarding 3 now middle-aged men. And it was surreal is the only word. That's a word that's overused in our language, but it's the only way I can describe it. Here they are wearing suits and ties and jackets, and they're belly chained, leg ironed together, handcuffed together, chains
Yeah.
connecting everything. And it's like, and I turned around and I looked at the guards and I said, it takes all of you guys to guard 3 kids that are fixing to be let out of prison? And of course, they didn't have anything to say about that,
Right.
nor did they care. And so I talked to Damien first and I shook his hand, and it was so cold, I actually thought maybe he had expired. He was ashen faced and just was just nervous, really nervous. And of
Well,
course,
he's been on death row for so long at that
sure,
point.
18 years and 78 days worth. And
Yeah.
so I moved past him and assured him everything was going to be fine. And Mr. Miss Kelly looked up at me and said, "Hey, Dan." And I said, "You ready to go home?" And he said, "Yep." And so I got down to the last of the 3, Jason Baldwin. He immediately said, "Dan, am I doing the right thing?" And I said, "Well, you're going home. You're going to see your mom tonight. You're walking out of prison on a life sentence without parole. It seems like a pretty good decision to me, but um, uh, you know,
It just makes you sick, though. I mean, I know it has to make you sick. All
well, it
the,
does. After I
you
found
know,
out what really happened, I really had this guilty feeling, especially towards Jason, because he was not wanting to take the deal. He did not want to do it, but he did not
he
want
did it
to.
for Damien.
He did it for Damien and Jesse. He did.
Yeah.
He said, I can't be selfish. It's an all or nothing deal. All of us go home or none of us go home. And so I felt obliged to basically save Damien's life. His health was failing, his eyesight was failing, and he was really struggling. And so I walked back out to the hallway and found the room where Eddie Vedder was, and which was probably more secure than the West Memphis 3. And I went in the courtroom where they were at, and he introduced me to embrace me. We always greet each other with an embrace, and he introduced me to Natalie Maines. It was instrumental because she got sued by Terry Hobbs, and we got to do his
Right.
deposition for hours and hours and
She
hours.
was a Dixie chick, one of the
Yeah,
Dixie chicks. Yes.
yeah, they changed her name, I think. So it was great to meet her, and so we talked for a few minutes, and I thanked them all profusely for all the contributions that they made towards helping us out in the case. And about that time, somebody entered the room and said, "We're getting started. Come on." So off we went, and one by one, each of the West Memphis 3 was set free. Their convictions were set aside completely, and moments later, they each pled guilty while
Oh,
maintaining their innocence. And then they got to go home. And so to me, it seemed like a victory from God. It really did. I didn't understand how it happened, but I knew the result was they're out of prison.
they got free. Yeah. That
So
was the main goal, you
that was the
know.
main goal, and
Right.
of course, ironically, after the hearing, I got in the elevator with my fiance, who's now my wife, and we went downstairs to watch the press conference. And I wasn't that familiar with that courthouse, so not only did we go to the press conference, we found ourselves in it. And I was standing directly behind Scott Ellington as he was taking questions from all the media that had descended. And there was this full, I mean, media from everywhere. And I just wanted to kind of crawl into the wall, but I couldn't. And I didn't want to get back on the elevator and leave and look silly. So I just stood there. And it was at that point that one of the reporters asked Mr. Ellington, well, if you think they're guilty of killing 3 8-year-old kids, why are you letting them go? And I
Right.
thought, here we go. Here's the truthful moment, or not. And
Uh-huh.
I thought, surely he's anticipated this question. But he said his answer was, I hope they've rehabilitated themselves. And I just about passed out.
Oh boy.
And I thought, that's the best he got. If I'd have been him, I'd have went straight to my office and never had a press conference. But be that as it may, so now I'm standing there in front of all these cameras, and Lonnie Sowery from New York, who is our PR guy, and he was in charge of dealing with the press conferences, and he looked at me and he said, "Judge, do you want to take some questions while we're waiting for the others to get down here?" And I said, "Lonnie, thanks, but no thanks."
Right.
And he looked at me and he smiled and he said, "I get it." And he knew that I didn't know about this until the night before. So a few minutes later, the rest of the West Memphis Three and all the defense lawyers came down. It was so cramped. I ended up all the way to the right-hand side of my right-hand side of the table where the West Memphis Three were sitting, and Natalie Maines was in front of me, and beside her was her bodyguard, and he turned around and he said, "Hey, Judge, you've been a big part of this. You need to be up here, not me." So I didn't argue with him because I knew he had a gun. And so I took his place, and he was behind Natalie and I, and the press conference kind of spoke for itself, but I can sum it up in one quote from Jason Baldwin, and that was, "This isn't justice. It took a false confession to get us in prison, and it took another false confession to get us out."
Ah,
And,
Yeah.
true.
and I thought,
True.
oh, the kid nailed it. So after it was over, they answered questions for probably half an hour or so, maybe 45 minutes, and everybody went their ways.
It's
Jamie and
bizarre.
Jason got escorted out under heavy security with Natalie and Eddie, and off they went. And I escorted Mr. Miskelly outside to where his father was waiting, battered old
Poor
car.
kid.
And he looked at me and he said, "Dan, you going to that big party tonight over in Memphis?" And I said, "No, I didn't get invited. And besides that, it's my son's birthday, and so we're having a party for him tonight." And he looked at me and he smiled and he said, "I ain't going either." It was again, it was just kind of surreal. Nobody bothered him. Nobody said anything to him, and there was just so much excitement. It was the exact opposite of what it was like in 1993 when the lynch mobs were standing outside the courthouse in Marion, uh, the county seat of Crittenden County, and where West Memphis is located. And
They were just wanting a punching bag. People wanted. It didn't matter who it was, just as
they
long as
had to have
somebody
scapegoats.
was
Somebody
held
had to
accountable.
pay. Yep, that's exactly right.
You know, and that's like the whole satanic panic thing. It was a huge influence on his case. I mean, he was profiled. I talked about that earlier. I said, I love Metallica. I read Stephen King. I wear black. I am a Christian Wiccan. So, they would have prosecuted me. I'd have been a
You
murderer,
you wouldn't have
according
stood a
to
chance
their
in the Bible
standards.
Belt.
Yeah.
You would have been a goner.
Oh, yeah. It's
I
just mind boggling how it even happened with no evidence. There was no DNA evidence. There was no evidence to place them at the scene. I mean, nothing. How I wanted to ask you about wrongful conviction cases. How did it move forward now, or have laws been placed in Arkansas to prevent this from happening again?
Well, the DNA statute that's been in the news recently because the Arkansas Supreme Court back in April is now allowing the West Memphis Three, primarily Damien Eccles, who filed the petition, to retest the evidence with enhanced DNA techniques, including the MVAC machine, which is amazing.
Is that the
Um,
Act 1780?
I think so. Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah. And that was passed after they were convicted. And I know the gentleman who was the sponsor of the bill. And I was pheasant hunting one day, and he said, "You don't know who I am, do you?" And I said, "No, sir." And he said, "My name is Kevin Smith," and I introduced that bill into the legislature, and it passed. And the language of it did not say you had to be in custody to conduct testing. It just said you have the right to test for DNA if it's available. And so the West Memphis Police Department and the city attorney and the prosecuting attorney first said that the file had been lost to a fire. Then they said it had been lost to a
Uh-huh.
flood.
Uh-huh.
And so they were very cleverly filed a Freedom of Information Act. And what do you know? Magically, the file appeared right where it's supposed to be in the file
I know how that
memory
happens.
field. Yeah, so they don't want this tested because that could very well expose them for what they really are. Which I hope my book has satisfactorily done that. The people that did this deserve to have the truth told about what they did and why they did it, and the the case ending in the way it did with the Alford plea. It sort of became like JFK, the assassination of JFK, and other things that just didn't happen in a way that people could understand, or they wanted more answers. And so in my book, I tried to provide those answers. And um, so basically, what we have here is, as you stated very acutely, there was no evidence whatsoever except this wild, crazy story that Mr. Muskelly gave that didn't fit the evidence at the crime scene.
Well,
Yeah.
also,
Go ahead.
me and Holly were talking a couple days ago. The false confession, we were wondering, was
Yes.
anybody with these boys when they were with them for 12 hours hounding him for a false confession? Because they were
They were
minors.
minors. Hmm.
Were they
Yeah.
just alone with no guardian
Well, the
being
way it
asked
went,
over and over and over until they just cracked and got a false confession?
that's pretty much how it happened. The police show up on June 3rd, 1993, to Mr. Miskelly Sr.'s place of employment and said, "Hey, we would like to talk to Jesse, and if he can tell us anything that helps us, there's a $35,000 reward available." And so by this time, they had already zeroed in like a laser beam on Damien Eccles because he was the weird kid in town. Wore all black and listened to heavy metal music, and just that was his claim to fame. And so they, Big Jesse goes and gets little Jesse. He was babysitting for someone, and brought him back to the place where he worked, and the three of them, the police officer, Mike Allen, who's now the sheriff of Crittenden County, they discussed the $35,000 reward, and so Mr. Miskelly thought, what could happen except we make some money. They actually talked about what they were going to do with the money, buy a new car or a new truck for his dad.
Aw.
And
That's so
so,
sad, though, because these kids were minors. It just
and under
Well,
Arkansas law in 1993, you could not be interrogated by the police unless your parent
right.
signed the Miranda waiver as well and agreed to the interrogation. And that didn't happen.
So
And
how were they
so,
not held accountable? That's my question. Why weren't the police held accountable?
and
well,
how
that's
did
why
that confession even hold up in court if the parents didn't sign a paper?
The Miranda.
that was my argument to the trial judge and to the appellate court. And their response was, well, he's being tried as an adult. So the adult rules apply, not the juvenile.
But he wasn't being tried as an adult when he was a suspect and being questioned. That's
That's
that's the
what
thing.
they said. And so I asked the judge, and it's in the record of the case. I said, so if my client were to go to the high school and throw rocks through the windows of the school, he would have the right to have a parent present, and they would have to sign off on the Miranda waiver. But since he's charged with 3 capital murder counts, he doesn't have that right. It seems to me that the higher the penalty, the greater the risk, the more protection there would be. And he just denied it. And so did the Arkansas Supreme Court. And
And
it
it was a
was,
witch hunt. Like I said, it was a modern day witch hunt. It
it
was
really
Salem
was.
all over.
It
But I
was,
guess
the
it
irony is that Salem happened almost exactly 300 years earlier
Yep.
in 1692 and 93.
Yep.
but they
So,
picked these 3 poor boys out as if they were the only ones that listened to Metallica and wore black. Like, I just don't understand.
well, in 1993 in Arkansas, it was pretty uncommon for people, most kids, to be listening to heavy metal music. If they did, they didn't tell anybody. So that was, at Jason's. I took a Polaroid of him at the time of his arrest, and he was wearing a Metallica T-shirt. And,
Um,
and so
Yeah.
they, in the trial, they introduced the fact that Damien, in the second trial, they introduced the fact that Damien had checked out of the local library some Stephen King books and some book called "A Night on a Broomstick." I can't remember the exact the name of the book, but all these books that he checked out of the library were
that had
introduced.
I
mentioned
feel like
Aleister
I
Crowley.
feel
And
like
Aleister Crowley was a Satanist, right? But it wasn't a satanic book. It just happened to mention Aleister Crowley in it.
Yep, that's exactly correct. Then you got to
Go ahead,
keep in
Beth.
mind that
I feel like they would have been shocked by some of the stuff I was reading at 8 and 9 years old. I mean, I'm just gonna say I was reading like serial killer stuff about serial killers at
Me
this
too.
age. I mean, my mom let me. She had no because I was so fascinated with it.
Right.
And so and I was 8 and 9
Yep.
in 93 and 94.
well, I've
I mean,
always
I was
said
obsessed. I mean,
if this
to
had
me
happened in New York City, there's thousands of Damien Eccles walking down the streets of New York and L.A. and he wouldn't have stuck out like a sore thumb. But in a small town, rural Arkansas,
Yep.
he stuck out like a sore thumb. And he was
Yep.
never going to be the quarterback for the football team or the student body president. He was the weird kid. And because of that, everybody left him alone. So,
They do. I was the weird kid. I grew up in a small town, Indiana. Um, I liked my black. I liked my metal. I liked reading Stephen King novels. When I was in high school, I would do reports on, you know, Charles Manson and different things like that. Any school report that we could do, or the Nazis, or I was just interested in the psychological.
Same thing with Damien. He studied different religions, and
That's
he
it.
was
He
a very
did.
intelligent young man, but
Yes.
he didn't have a lick of sense because he toyed with the police.
Right.
And he thought in his mind that if I'm not guilty, they can't convict me.
Well, that common sense would tell you that, but it didn't turn
Didn't.
out that way.
Wasn't the case, and that was sad because they even said that. Well, we can't be convicted if we're not guilty, and
Right.
that was not the case at all.
And he was a little cocky. He was 17 years old.
And a
I
boy,
mean, come on.
yeah,
He's getting attention. He's getting, all kinds of notoriety. His 5 minutes of fame, he thought,
Well, there's
yeah,
a
he said some
famous
stupid
scene
things, that he regrets.
at the end of Paradise Lost, the first installment of the trilogy. While they're waiting for the jury to come back,
yes,
they had their
Yeah.
cameras in there, and Damien said, "I'm going to be known as the West Memphis Boogeyman for
the
the rest of
Yeah.
my
boogeyman.
life."
Yes,
And so little kids are going to be afraid of me for the rest of their lives. And he sort of took some kind of weird pleasure in that. So
Right.
he certainly didn't do himself any favors. But
No, he didn't. And he regretted it later. He
he
admitted.
regrets it now. I haven't talked to him since Bruce Sinofsky, one of the documentarians, passed away in 2015. And my wife and I went to the memorial service, and I actually spoke right after Damien did. And he still had that shell-shocked look on his face.
Yeah.
And it's just really sad what happened to these kids. They took the best years of their lives away from them, and they
and
didn't
It
get
did.
nothing. They didn't get
like someone said in the chat earlier, they even though they're free, they're not really free
That's a
because
good way to put it.
they're not. People still think they're guilty, and they're not free psychologically from everything that's happened and
Well,
from the years lost.
I probably shouldn't say this, but before I wrote the book, I would routinely get nasty text messages, email messages, I should say. The day I announced that I was writing the book in 2014, actually it was before then, 2012, I believe, and I was on the front page of my local hometown newspaper, the Paragould Daily Press, and had a picture of me, and my mailbox got blown up that day.
Yeah.
That was the second time that's happened. So
Wow.
on that day, I got death threats from 3 different continents,
Wow.
and so that's how people, thought about this. And
It's very emotional for a lot of reasons. I mean, like I've been laid in bed thinking about this as I'm researching at night. I'm staying up thinking about this. There's so many victims
There
in
is.
this crime, not just the 3 little boys. It was the 3, yeah, older
Well, that's
boys.
why I named the
And the
book, or
parents on both
titled the book,
sides.
Harvest
Yeah,
of Innocence, because that's
yeah,
exactly what happened. 3 little boys lost their innocence. These 3 teenagers, now middle-aged guys,
yeah,
they lost their innocence, and everybody this case has touched, it's been like a virus. There's no winners in this case, and it came very close to putting me down a couple times. My health suffered, and I went through a lot of depression and trying to do something that at times seemed impossible, yet I just couldn't let it go. My marriage didn't make it through it, and just
sorry.
a lot of bad things. But somebody asked me on a podcast last week if I regret getting involved in this thing, and I didn't hesitate at all. I said, no, I'd do it all over again.
Right.
Right.
And ironically, it was my ex-wife who told me I should do it, because I went to her for advice thinking she'd talk me out of it, and she didn't. And then my obsession became one of the primary reasons we got divorced. But,
I could understand it.
I was one obsessed individual, and there was a reporter, Sean Flynn, who came to write a story about the Alford plea and the West Memphis 3 being released. He was writing an article for Gentleman's Quarterly, and he didn't know anything about the case. I was kind of surprised. But he was a quick study, and I spent a couple days with him, and we watched the third installment of Paradise Lost, and he interviewed me at length, and he summed it up better than anyone I've ever known. He said these kids were basically sent to prison on nothing more than a well-told campfire story. And
Yeah.
that's exactly right.
Really were.
Yeah.
When I was a kid, there were rumors about satanic cults out in the woods, and I was an Eagle Scout. I guess I still am. They haven't stripped me of that award. But we would go out in the woods and do campfires, and we had an organization called Within the Scouts. It's sort of like the Navy SEALs, the Boy Scouts, the Order of the Arrow, and it was all based on Indian lore. And we would dress up in these fancy Indian headdresses, and we built an altar and had candles, and had all these cow skulls and horse skulls, and we had them all painted up, and every year we'd go back out to that same place, and almost every year I would get a call from the local sheriff saying, "Dan, you've been out there in the woods playing around again with the Boy Scouts?" And I'd say, "Yep." And he said, "We had a couple hunters walk up on that, and it scared the heck out of them. You mind coming and taking some of those skulls out of there at least?"
Because they automatically think satanic ritual. Yeah.
And that was what was going on back then. There were all the horror flicks, and I don't know if you remember this or not, but there was a guy named Bill Clinton from Arkansas who was elected president in 1992.
Yeah.
Yes, yes,
And
yes.
and Al Gore was his vice president, and
Yeah.
Tipper Gore, one of her pet projects as second lady, was to put warning labels on music.
Yes.
And there was these rumors going around if you played certain songs backwards,
Yes.
they would
Remember
say
that.
satanic
The-
things, and
The PMRC, yes, I remember
Yes.
that well.
if your name is Damien, and if you've watched the movie Omen, The Omen,
Right.
you know that the main character, the Antichrist, is Damien.
Right.
And Jason was the bad guy, I believe, on Jamie Curtis's long-running series of Halloween.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so Jesse was the only
Friday
one that
the
didn't have one.
13th. Yeah.
Yeah,
Friday
Michael
the 13th,
Myers.
yeah.
Michael Myers in Halloween. Yeah.
Yep.
Yep, that's right. It was.
Yeah.
They were
Friday
out of
13th. Yeah.
I think. Yep, you're right. I've been. But that was the atmosphere back in the late '80s or mid '80s and through the early '90s, and then the FBI completely debunked, primarily because of the McMartin preschool case in California. They completely debunked this theory of satanic ritual homicide. In fact, there's never been a single case ever documented on the planet.
Wow.
And the study was replicated in the UK, and so there just literally is there's no such thing. Now there are people, Berkowitz, who's known as the son
Right.
of Sam. Sam was his neighbor's dog, and he thought Sam was the devil, and the devil was telling him to
Yep.
go out and kill people.
Son of
And,
Sam.
Yep.
and then there was the Night Stalker out in California. He carved pentagrams in his palm, and we can even take it back further than that when Charles Manson was on trial with
Yes.
carving the X on their forehead. And so, when I've got a bachelor's degree in sociology, and we studied. It's basically the psychology of groups, and mass hysteria events have been happening throughout history, all the way going back to things like meteors hitting the Earth, and there's the famous radio show that Orson Welles did. People thought
The world's
Martians
it.
were invading the world, and
Yeah.
didn't hear the disclaimer at the front, and then just you can name them: Salem, Massachusetts, and
Yeah.
all the Black Death, and in Europe in medieval times they thought that was supernatural. And Elvis, I believe, once was quoted as saying, "People are scared of things they don't understand," and that's exactly what happened. Nobody could wrap their minds around what was not just the death of 3 8-year-old children, but a human atrocity. The wounds to the bodies were horrific, and
Yes.
they still haunt me. They always will. But there was a time when I could spread out all those photographs and
Oh,
autopsy photographs on my table in my conference room and library at the office and eat a pepperoni pizza. It didn't bother me at all. But now I can't stand to even gaze at them. But,
right.
but
Yeah,
it's
it's horrific. That's what said. I'll never get it out of my head. From the
Yeah.
documentary, seeing them. That's what I was telling Stephen. I said, I'll never get those images out of my head. It was horrific what happened to them kids. And what's even more horrific is that the murderer or murderers are still walking around.
Still walking
Maybe
around.
yep.
That blows my
they got
mind.
they got away with it anyway.
Well, this new DNA testing will put us on a good path, and one of the things, and I'm going down several rabbit holes at the same time, and I apologize for that. But
That's okay.
what I was saying earlier, right before I wrote the book and it was published, I would just routinely get these crazy emails telling me I was going to go to hell, and I was a devil worshiper and a Satanist,
Oh,
and
jeez.
and one guy from Philadelphia just relentlessly kept sending. I just kept ignoring, and finally, and every time at the end of the email, he'd say, "I'll never bother you again," and then of course he would.
He would.
And so I contacted law enforcement, and now I know his name, where he lives, his cell phone number, his wife's name, his kid's name,
Everything.
where she works, where he works, her cell phone. So he hasn't bothered me since,
Well,
and
yeah.
I'm beginning to wonder if he hadn't read the book, um, because since I
Right,
wrote the book,
Samuel. Yeah.
that doesn't mean my mailbox won't get blown up tomorrow, but it went through a metamorphosis. I actually found a quote today, and I hope I could find it. Someone named Arthur Schopenhauer once said that all truth passes through 3 stages. First, it is ridiculed. Second, it is violently opposed. And third, it is accepted as being self-evident. And I think we've reached that
Uh,
third stage, in part because of my book, because I tell it like it is. I don't pull any punches, and I was as hard on myself as I was the other people involved, the prosecutors and the judge and the police. They did things that they shouldn't have done, and it was all about winning. It wasn't about truth or justice. It was about winning. And at one point in Paradise Lost, if you've seen the film, you'll recall another interesting scene where after the Miskelly trial is taking place, they're trying to coerce Mr. Miskelly into testifying against Damien and Jason.
Right.
And the prosecutors are meeting with the victim's parents, telling them that, hey, we're going to have to come down on his sentence if he's going to help us. He's not going to do it out of the kindness of his heart.
Right.
And the parents said, well, what are the odds of getting a conviction without his testimony? And the lead prosecutor said 50-50.
Yeah.
And that is
Because they
always
didn't have a
scrutiny.
case.
No.
So
And they
you're going
knew.
to
They
put
knew that.
somebody on trial for the death penalty on 50-50 evidence? That
Yeah.
doesn't sound like proof beyond a reasonable doubt.
No.
Um,
No. Well,
this
you
case,
even have jurors. The one juror. I forget his name, but the one juror that became the head of the jurors even said before he was picked, he said, "I'll never be picked," but he says, "If I do, I'll make sure that they are, put away forever and all this stuff." And he ended up being like the head of the jurors, and I'm like, how can you pick them? I mean, he was obviously biased walking in there. You know, how was he even picked to be a juror blows my mind.
There's
actually,
so
he
there's so
knew the
much about
prosecutor and graduated from college with him.
Oh boy,
Um,
that's a conflict of interest right there.
Somehow that didn't get disclosed during the process.
Funny how that happens.
But, and in my book, I purposefully chose not to go into the second trial because I wasn't a part of it.
Right.
So I just kind of talked about the Miss Kelly trial and the aftermath, and my efforts to try to keep the fort held down until we could get some help. And finally, it arrived one day, and when I got a call from John Phillips born, who said Mr. Eddie Vedder wants you to fly to Seattle and give a briefing on all three cases. He's interested in helping out, and so I said, "Okay, when do you want to meet?" And it was Mother's Day. I'll never forget that. I can't remember the exact date, but it was not only Mother's Day, which didn't make my marriage any stronger. It was also the weekend before I was running for judge, and I
Wow.
was, I was in the last week of the campaign, and my campaign manager lost his mind. He said, "Like, you can't leave." He said, "The client comes first. I got to go. I made a promise to this kid, and I'm going to Seattle." And he agreed to help. And next thing you know, we've got lawyers. I could not talk anyone in the state of Arkansas to help with the case, but suddenly, not only did we get a couple of local lawyers from Little Rock and outstanding lawyers, but we got the best lawyers I've ever seen. Michael Burt, who represented Mr. Miskelly, his appellate counsel, and John Phillips, who represents Jason. Just amazing, the stuff they were doing. And Michael Burt probably knows more about DNA than anyone in the world. He's that slick. It was an honor to work with them, and it was an honor to work with all these world-class forensic experts. And I'll never forget the first time I met Dr. Michael Bodden. And actually, met would not be the best word to describe that. Stalking would be the best way to describe that. And I found out they were having a meeting in San Francisco of the American Society of Forensic Scientists, I think was the name of it. And so, without a ticket or an invitation, I showed up and managed to get Dr. Bodden in an elevator with a forensic entomologist and a forensic odontologist. And before we got up to their floor, I talked all three of them into coming in and looking at the photographs. And Dr. Bodden picked up the picture of Chris Byers and the sexual mutilation, and
Right.
he looked at it and he said, "This is animal predation."
Yeah.
And I said, "What?" And he said, "This is animal predation. It's plain as the nose on your face." And so that was 1998. That was 4 years after the convictions, and I already knew what had happened. I'd finally figured it out, but it still took to 2011 to get to the Alford plea. And then I'll never forget what he said next. He said, "These are the most horrible photographs I've ever seen, and I've done 10,000 autopsies."
I'd believe it.
And by the time he testified in 2008 and 2009 at the Rule 37 hearings, he testified he'd done 20,000 autopsies, and this was the worst he'd ever seen.
Yeah.
So, and you show
I,
those pictures to a jury in the Bible Belt and throw in a little satanic panic, and you can imagine that those jurors are going to punish someone, and
that's it.
they were scared to death. They didn't think they had any other options available to them. We were very fortunate because of some of the experts that I talked into helping me out for free on their own dime. Dr.
Right.
Richard Opsey from University of California at Berkeley, and Warren Holmes, who was an expert on the polygraph. And of course, they gave Jesse one of those. And somehow they decided to go get Mr. and Miss Kelly Sr.'s permission on the form for that, but they didn't get his permission on the Miranda form.
Yeah.
And so they hooked him up to this machine, and he passed it. And I know
Yeah.
that because I sent the polygraph charts to Mr. Holmes, who was reluctant to get involved in the case, but when he saw the confession and saw the polygraph charts, he called me back with a whole new attitude and said, "I'm coming to Arkansas to testify this kid's innocent." And
Wow.
the polygrapher, it's unusual for a small police department to have its own polygrapher. But according to Warren Holmes, they didn't do it correctly, and they also told him he was lying his quote unquote ass off. And so the polygraph is used by police to induce a false confession. Or let me rephrase that: they use the polygraph to induce a confession, and oftentimes it results in a false confession. So Dr. Offshay came in. He came to Arkansas on 2 occasions, once for the suppression hearing and once for the trial itself. But Judge Burnett wouldn't let him testify as to his conclusions. And so we got cut off at the knees in our defense, but we did get enough of it in that the jury acquitted him of 3 counts of capital murder, found him guilty on 1 count of first degree and 2 counts of second. Of course, Burnett stacked them and gave him life plus 40, which is essentially life without.
Right.
And so 3 weeks later, he lets a guy, a retired police officer from Ohio, testify in the Eccles Baldwin trial, who had a fake mail order PhD from some university out west, where you mail your money and they mail you your PhD. And
Wow.
he admitted he never had stepped foot on campus or never took an exam or anything.
I had no education in that. That's it.
So,
Yeah, like one of our polycyst C in our chat room said, "Yeah, what a scam." Yeah, I agree. I totally agree.
in fact,
We do have a good question, though, Judge Dan, and if in the chat room from Hog Talica. I love the name, by the way.
he's got to be from Arkansas.
Yeah, I love it.
He or
But
she.
They were asking, Dan, there were several motions that you made in the pre-trial and trial itself that Judge Burnett denied. If you could overturn only one of those motions, which one would you choose that would have given you all the best chance of an acquittal?
That's a good question. The only two motions I can recall winning were the motion for a change of venue, which was a slam dunk. And one time during the trial, I asked to go to lunch early, and everything else was denied, quite literally. But in the suppression hearing, we were asking the court to suppress the confession, if you want to call it that. I call it a bunch of malarkey, because it is. It just doesn't match anything. But I planted a seed during the suppression hearing that eventually would grow into a giant oak tree. It took 18 years and 78 days, but there was a rule in Arkansas in 1993 that was a enhanced constitutional right. And according to 50 years of case law and Rule 2.3 of the Arkansas Rules of Criminal Procedure, if you ask someone to come to the police station for questioning, you have to overtly tell them that they are under no force or compulsion to accompany them. And when we finally got Officer Allen, who's now the sheriff, on the witness stand, I was very careful how I phrased the question. But I said, what, if any, rights did you advise Mr. Miskelly of before you took him to the station for questioning? And he said, I didn't advise him of any rights. And that's exactly what I was hoping he would say. And so I passed the witness, and as quickly as I could, and they never caught on. So at the end of the hearing, I asked Judge Burnett for 24 hours to brief an issue that I couldn't have anticipated because I had no idea what Detective Allen was going to say. And
Right.
because there were so many news cameras in the courtroom, it would have made him look bad if he didn't give me that 24 hours. So he gave me 24 hours and then gave the prosecution 24 hours to respond. And we rushed back to Perryville, which is about 85 miles away, and added Rule 2.3 to our motion to suppress and wrote a long brief outlining all the case law. And the prosecutors never responded. And so, of course, the judge ultimately didn't suppress the confession, and I didn't think that he would. But
Right.
we had this appeal issue that was a slam dunk. And so we thought, well, if Judge Burnett won't do the right thing, then the Arkansas Supreme Court will do the right thing.
And they
And
didn't.
we appealed, and they threw me under the bus. They said I didn't raise the issue in a timely fashion.
Huh.
But by doing so, and of course, we asked for a rehearing because we did raise it, and we pointed it out to them where exactly in the record, what page and sentence line on the page that it was on. And their response was, we're not going to rehear that because we said so. It was like a playground retort because I said so. It was like, dealing with, a schoolyard bully or something. And
Yeah, they
they
had no legal precedence. They just, I
threw me
said so.
right under the bus. I mean, just
Wow.
so my law partner, Mr. Crow, trying to console me because I was just so upset and disappointed. He
Right.
said, Dan, they can't have it both ways. I said, what do you mean? He said, if we did raise it, and we know we did, Jesse gets out of prison because that's the only evidence they had against him was the confession.
Yep.
And if we didn't raise it, and they've already said for the record on appeal that we didn't raise it, then that means we were ineffective as his counsel at trial, and he'll get a new trial based on that. And I thought, yeah, that's right. I didn't think of that. So we had him backed in the corner. And that's what made me so angry about the Alford plea when we all thought we were going to get a new trial. And so why the Alford plea? And that began the 10-year process of me trying to figure out who was the architect of the plea, who whose idea was it, who put it
Right.
together, and why didn't we just wait for trial? And there's pros and cons about that.
Yeah.
It might
Yeah.
have taken another 5 years to get a new trial.
Right.
There would have had to be 3 trials instead of 2 this time.
Well, and it's
Mm.
dangerous because Damien was sitting on death row.
And there was still a chance. Yeah, and he was literally in very poor health. And in my mind, of course, if there was still a possibility that the jury could believe the crazy confession.
Right.
Even though we had completely destroyed it, we proved that it wasn't a satanic ritual. This was not the first satanic ritual ever documented on the planet. So I became bitter after the Alfred plea when I started figuring out what went down, and one of the things that I found out was that according to Mr. Ellington, the lawyers for Eccles were more than willing to leave my guy behind in prison. Mr. Ellington said, "Nope, it's all or nothing."
Right.
So he's my hero for that, and but but I still didn't understand completely. And so for those 10 years that it took me to write a book while life was happening, and there were things that happened along the way that I couldn't help and couldn't account for and didn't expect or anticipate. One being that Judge Burnett successfully found me an opponent to run against me in 2016, and which we had to stop our writing process, and I had to go into combat mode, and we won by 61% of the vote.
Well done.
So, and Judge Burnett didn't win; he lost his Senate seat that he had acquired after he finally put down the West Memphis case and left. And it is no coincidence that within months of him leaving the case and becoming a senator, they
Here
were
comes the
released.
Alford plea.
So it's not a coincidence at all. I don't believe in coincidences.
Mm-mm. Mm-mm. I don't either. And I do hope this has led to a lot of reforms in the laws that
Well,
this don't happen again.
that was one of the goals of my book, was to make sure that there was not any more future Jesse Miskellys. But unfortunately, it still happens every day around the country. It doesn't happen just in Arkansas. Satanic panic doesn't just happen in Arkansas. I was watching the news a few years ago, and I don't remember which channel I was watching, but they reported that an entire family had been killed in a satanic cult ritual, and I thought, yeah, right.
Yeah.
But there's still, to this day, if you Google it, they're still doing seminars on law enforcement and the occult, and how law enforcement officers should deal with satanic ritual homicides. And there's no such thing. But there's still law enforcement officers who believe there are. Now, there's kids who dabble in stuff, play with Ouija boards, and watch crazy movies,
Yeah, they
and
dabble.
yeah, and but that doesn't make them Satanists who sacrifice children in a ritual.
Right.
So even the one person satanic team from the New York City Police Department, after in the wake of Berkowitz's case, he actually faxed some tips to the West Memphis police that if this happened on a Wednesday under a full moon and there was genital mutilation, then it was definitely a satanic ritual homicide. And so when you hear that from the biggest law enforcement organization in the country, these West Memphis cops believed it.
Right.
And the reason they believed it is because they badly misinterpreted the autopsy when it came out. And,
Well, the bite mark wasn't even mentioned in the first trial. There was a bite mark found later, and there was just all this
actually,
other evidence
actually, it turned out not to be a
that it
bite mark.
wasn't a bite mark.
And by then, that was one of our first appellate issues. But by the time we had gotten to the Rule 37 hearings, we had completely abandoned that because that's the same sort of junk science, like hairs are similar and fibers are similar. I started to say if your hair was gray, as mine is, what's left of it, we would have similar hairs. If so, just because your hair color is similar to someone else's, that doesn't mean you were there. And fibers are the same way. Now sometimes fibers can be unique enough that it's helpful, but for the most part, a red fiber is a red fiber, or green fiber is a green fiber, and it doesn't prove anything. So this is the West Memphis case is a case study in wrongful convictions because we had everything. We had it all in this case, and I traveled
Right.
the country talking to lawyers and law students and college students, even high school students, and professional organizations, and we had it all. If you go, and everyone should, who's listening, should go check out the Innocence Project website. I think it's innocenceproject.org. And they have, as of the last time they updated their website, they've had 250 project victories. And what that means is it may not have, the DNA may not have exonerated it, a particular person, but it may have excluded them in a rape murder case, for example. Someone else's DNA was there, not them, and so they get exonerated. That they consider that in the victory
Right.
category. But of those 250 victories, the people who were exonerated spent a total of 3,898 years in prison. And that's mind-boggling.
It is. It is
And,
mind-boggling.
and of those 250 exonerations, 89 led to the arrest and conviction of the actual perpetrator. And
Great.
191 of those exonerated came off of death row. And that's a staggering amount.
So,
91 out of 250.
well, I have to ask you this, Judge. I mentioning no names whatsoever. Do you have in mind, and you are leaning pretty dang positive that you know who the killer is?
I've got a couple of good theories. And if we're able to amplify some of the DNA that we collected in 2006 and had studied, then that may put us right where we need to be. So there was a partial DNA match to Terry Hobbs, who was the stepfather of
Oh my gosh.
uh,
Yes.
Steve Branch. And
Yup.
it wasn't enough DNA material to exclude him as to everyone else in the world.
Right.
But the person who was with him that night searching for the kids, his hair was found on a tree stump at the site where the bodies were recovered, and it
Yes.
was 99.99 or somewhere near there match. So we know he was there. So it makes sense that Terry Hobbs was there as well. And the place where the hair was found was inside one of the ligatures that bound the victim, Michael Moore. And as I was quoted in the movie West of Memphis, that's pretty damning evidence. But it's not enough to convict. And the last thing I want to do is say we got somebody because we don't have enough evidence to convict. And I don't want to do the same thing to him or anyone else that they did to our guy and start another well-told campfire story. So I'm not willing to take him off the list, but my second theory is West Memphis is unique in the fact that it's a small town just across the Mississippi River from Memphis, Tennessee.
Right.
And about 10,000 to 12,000 big rig trucks go through there every day. It's the third busiest interstate highway exchange in America. So there for about a mile, maybe 3/4 of a mile, interstates 40 and 55 actually come together. And in that mile is all these big truck stops and truck washes and
Bojangles. Can
the restaurants. Yeah, Mr.
uh-huh.
Bojangles. So it would have been very easy because the kids were last seen, two of them riding, or three of them riding two bicycles on the service road right where the bodies were recovered the next day. Right there
Well,
by
there was a
the
neighbor, the neighbor that lived like three doors down from the one, and they were on their way to church, and vividly remembers seeing all three of them about 6:30 that night.
And our investigators uncovered that they never went to the police and said
No,
anything. The police never asked them about it. So
and you would have thought they would have spoke with the neighbors. I mean,
you would have thought they would have canvassed.
hmm
They allegedly did, but somehow that slipped through the cracks.
hmm
A lot of
hmm
things slip through the cracks.
So yeah, indeed, and I'm not going to say that I can prove that they lost that DNA evidence, blood evidence from Mr. Bojangles in the restaurant on purpose, but I
hmm
think by the time they rounded up the three scapegoats, they didn't want to have anything get in the way of that conviction.
Correct.
So I
Correct.
think I'm just saying it might have been accidentally lost in a
Feel
happy
like,
accident or something.
Which is tragic.
do you feel
It
like it
is.
was just they had been searching for so long that it was just let's find somebody, convict them, and get this over with?
Yeah, it
Oh,
was a witch hunt.
absolutely.
Yeah.
This case went to trial in
It
9
didn't matter
months.
who it was, just to put somebody in jail to say we
Yeah.
caught somebody.
The parents, the people in the area, the townspeople, they needed a martyr.
So
That's
sad
the
because
sociological aspect of this is when an evil descends upon a town or a community and no one can explain it in logical, rational terms, they begin to turn to the supernatural. And so
Right.
Damien was the obvious choice. And because Jason happened to be his best friend, and Jesse used to live in the same trailer park that they did,
Mm,
that's how they got to the finish line. And these were three kids from the wrong side of the tracks that were expendable, and they couldn't defend themselves. So they got stuck with me, or like Mr. Miss Kelly did. I ended up
well,
representing Mr.
I'm
Baldwin
glad he
on the
did.
booger bushes for a while, but I just couldn't stand to see the time run on his appeal. So
Yeah.
I helped out a little bit, but
Well, I do want to applaud you,
well, thank you.
Judge Dan.
I'm
I
glad
really
to.
do, for fighting for these boys, for bringing this out, even though you were under death threats and all this other, with the mailbox blowing up and everything else. I mean, you still fought for these three young men, and that's to be applauded. You had the bravery to do so.
Well, it's tough bucking the system, and there's
Yes, it is.
consequences for that. And um, uh, Terry Hobbs suing Natalie Maines in the Dixie
Yes.
Chicks was one of the best things that ever happened in this case, and so I'm
It
double
didn't work
dog
out too
daring
well.
somebody to sue me because I'd love to do some depositions in this case of my own, and under oath.
Go ahead.
So, bring it on because I can prove everything that's in my book, and I'm not. I'd rather not be sued. I'm joking, but if I do,
Right.
I'm going to take full advantage of it.
Correct.
And
Correct.
I've been
Did
around
you
filling up
search for a
the author
ghostwriter
film.
in writing this book, or did you write it yourself? Oh, go ahead.
I started writing it with the help of a friend who was working on her doctoral thesis at Arkansas State University,
Uh-huh.
and she would come over and I'm the storyteller and she did the outline for the book and in 2014 after we shot the first 100 pages around, tried to find an agent, do it the conventional way, and I've always my philosophy in life is I'm going to start at the top and work my way down, and I want the best of everything. If often I can't afford the best of everything, but sometimes I can convince people to help me, and so I that's what I did. I just went out and found people who were willing to help me and sell the case in that matter, and and Eddie Vedder was on the fence when we all met in Seattle,
Right.
and I like to think that I pulled him over onto our side, but it people now don't vilify me. They my first book signing here in my hometown, I had people lined up around the block and at the local bookstore, and I thought, no way. And my wife went outside and took a picture, and it was about 50 degrees and drizzling, and people stood in line for 5 hours.
Yes.
Some of
Yeah.
them even had read the entire book by the time they brought it in for me to sign. And I'm not sure I would stand in line for 5 hours for anything or anyone, but so I was impressed, and I'd never expected that. But
It's touched a lot of people. This
it really
case.
has.
Yeah.
It has.
At the beginning, a lot of people like yourself, you know, and Mr. Vetter,
Yeah.
they felt a connection to Damien Eccles and his
Yeah.
plight. And
Yeah.
so Damien's always been the conduit for all the celebrities and all the people that came in. And of course, these are people who were outcast when they were kids too.
Right.
And Metallica donated their music to the HBO films because they didn't like the fact that they were brought into this and
Right.
blamed for this in a
Yeah.
way. So um, when I was a kid, I listened to pop music and disco. I shouldn't admit that, but I did. And so I had a few friends who listened to AC/DC, and I all it was to me was a bunch of screaming. So I just never got into that stuff. And I grew up listening to Elvis and Jerry Lee Lewis records,
Hmm.
and so I just wasn't my thing. But one of the strange ironies, and I don't think this is in the book, but a couple of weeks after the Alford plea, I happened to go to a football game where my youngest, who was an all-state quarterback, his team was playing Scott Ellington, the prosecutor's team, and we kind of ran into each other at the concession stand, and we're talking about the Alford plea and things, and all of a sudden, one of the marching bands comes out and starts playing a Metallica song, Sandman. And
Nice.
I thought, this is crazy. I mean, we just did this Alfred play in 30, or at that time, 2 decades had almost passed. And suddenly Metallica is such a common, it's elevator music now. I don't make them mad by saying that, but if you listen carefully, you'll hear it sometimes.
Yeah,
But that's what happens with music. Those guys are, I think they're still together.
they are.
Oh yeah, selling out
They
stadiums.
just had a new album like last year. Yeah, so yeah,
Yeah,
they're
and they're touring
Mm.
stadiums. Yes, they're very mainstream. So yeah, they definitely have
yeah.
had some elevator music versions
And
made.
I've been following them. Well, me and Steve have been following them since they
Oh yeah,
started. So yeah.
And
yeah.
AC/DC is one of my favorite bands now.
Yes, yes.
Oh yeah,
Oh
love them.
yes.
And, just, but I, when I went to concerts, it was Bob Seger was my first concert. Actually, Elvis was my first concert
It's a
in
good one.
'74,
Ooh, there's a good one.
and
And I mean, think about it. Back in '74, I was born then. I'm telling my age, but I was born. But back in '74, when he shook them hips and everything else, oh, that was scandalous. Elvis was gyrating around, and they didn't want to show him on TV. If you listen to Elvis, you were some kind of a sinner, or
that's right.
and that's where it all goes.
They
You
go
think
on
about this
songs
over
from the
the years.
waist up and Ed Sullivan Show,
Right, right,
and
because of his hip movements, and it was the same thing with this case. They were profiling based on what these children were into, musically, reading,
Mhm.
whatever, and that's sad.
well, I finally decided it was a joint decision between Haley and I, who was working on her thesis about the book of
Mhm,
the story, that we needed a ghostwriter because I started at the top looking for the best agent in New York, and he actually answered my phone call, which surprised me. And sent him what I had, and he wrote me back, or actually he called me back, and he said, "You write like a lawyer." And I said, "No, that's because I am a lawyer." And he said, "Well, that's not going to work. You're going to have somebody write this for you that speaks English, not legalese." And so he said, "You need to
mhm,
get a ghostwriter to help you out." And so I literally Googled ghostwriter, and this page showed up. I don't remember what the name of the web page or what the service was, but you would have actually people bid on your project. And I really just immediately was
mhm,
drawn to Tom McCarthy because he had written a couple of bestsellers for celebrities, and of course he never got any credit because he was a ghostwriter. And
right,
well, I said, he put in a bid, and I accepted the bid, refinanced my house, and paid him. And
wow,
after we got the first draft done, which was about 6 months behind schedule, he said,
that
he said,
happens.
Dan, this thing's a lot more complicated than I thought it was going to
Mhm,
be. And he
mhm,
said, I can't keep working on this and not get paid. And I said, well, I can't refinance my house again.
right,
Why don't you be a co-author instead of a ghostwriter and finally get credit for something worthwhile? I said, well, even put your name first. I could care less. I'm not in
right,
this for money. I'm not in it for, I just wanted to tell the truth. I wanted there to be a true accounting of what really happened. And
what
I was the
happened?
only person that was there from the beginning to the end,
Right,
and
right,
continuously. So even though I was kept in the dark about the Alford plea, but so were the other lawyers in California. So it that was the goal. The goals of my book were to tell the truth about what happened, and I I go through a chapter where I explain Mr. and Miss Kelly's intellectual disabilities. Um, he was examined by Dr. Tim Durning, who's I think he's retired now, or maybe in private practice, but he's from California, and he came and interviewed Mr. Miskelly in 2004. And I was shocked to learn that Mr. Miskelly, what we referred to back then as mentally retarded, has MR, and it's static, and there's no cure, and it is what it is. And he
Oh, wow.
wasn't even fit to stand trial. Didn't
Well,
understand.
that's what I was thinking, that he
He
shouldn't
thought we
even have
were
stood trial.
cops. My partner and I. He thought Greg and I were cops, and he kept trying to get the story right. And every time he would tell the story, it'd be a different story.
Right.
We could never come up with a narrative. We would have to just say, "Did this happen, or did this happen?"
Hmm.
And so I've already given away more of the book than I should have. But eventually, it became obvious that he was innocent, and so
Right.
I got to do my first jury trial with a triple homicide for 3 8-year-olds, capital murder case. That was my first jury trial, his first chair.
Jeez, oh, Pete.
Mhm.
Are you
Mhm.
still in contact with him at all?
He is elusive. I stay in contact with him through friends and what family he has left.
Hmm.
But it's been a while since I've spoken to him. But he's still in the same trailer park that they plucked him out of in 1993.
Oh, wow.
I
Poor
speak to
kid.
Jason more often than anybody else. He and I have become very good friends, and um, I'm glad that he trusted me to sign that petition that saved his appeal process.
Yes.
And I'm not so sure if the lawyer for the guy that did the confession showed up at prison and I was in his shoes, I would have signed it. But
Right.
he trusted me, and we've developed a very strong bond because of that. And in fact, I just talked to him yesterday. Um,
Oh, wow.
and we've done a couple of. We're working on a project with Fox. Not so much about the case, but about some of the people who worked on the case.
Uh-huh.
So that's going to come out starting next month. It's a 3-part series, and our part will probably be around the 1st of October. So it was great to
We'll
see
be on
him
the lookout
again.
for that then.
Um, and so it's and of course I haven't seen Damien since 2015. But
Mm.
some of the things and I could talk about this for hours, and I know I got a late start because I'm not smart enough to push the right button. But
Well, we've kept you
um,
on here quite a while. That's what I said. We're
I
definitely going to have you back after the
evidence is
Fox.
tested.
Yeah, yeah, and the evidence have been tested. We would love to have you back and discuss that. And do you think there's another book in the future? Do you think you're going to cover or say a few more things that you wanted to say that maybe your lips are sealed now after the DNA evidence comes out?
Yes, I do.
Okay.
It's ironic, but after the Alford plea, I started having people calling me and telling me things about the case that I didn't know about, and
Yeah, yeah.
perfectly
I
credible
figured that.
people. And some of that ended up in the book, some of it didn't,
Hmm.
and
Hmm.
so we had to really cut back. Our first draft was 550 pages, so we had to get it down to half that.
Right,
And now, since my book comes out, every time I do a book signing, somebody walks up and says, "Do you know that I was there when this happened?"
right.
Which corroborates what I put in the book, that someone has already had sworn testimony about. And so and I can't tell you what it is, obviously, but I was at a book signing at Barnes and Nobles the other day, and this kid, I don't even think he knew I was doing a book signing. I don't think he bought a book, and but he saw the sign and recognized the West Memphis Three, and he said,
Hmm.
"Did you know this, this, and this?" And I went, "What?" And so
Wow.
Definitely be doing a revised edition at some point. And the other theory that I didn't get to about the case is I think it's very likely that we're looking for a serial killer, an over-the-road truck driver, because there was a huge truck stop at the parking lot where the trucks parked overnight, or they have to sleep so many hours before they can drive again, and they have to keep a logbook of that. But the parking lot backed up to the crime scene, literally. If you got a good arm, you can throw a baseball from the truck stop parking lot to where the bodies were discovered the next day after they were missing. And I don't think those bindings, everybody calls them hogtied, but those bindings were not crisscrossed in the back. It was left ankle to left wrist and right ankle to right wrist. And if you can get your hands under you and around, you can get away. Not very fast, but you can get away. So I think those were carrying handles. I think that's what the killer used to. You could pick up two kids at one time and carry them over and dump them in the creek.
Well, Holly, I just had to cut in here because it turns out that Podbean does have a 2-hour limit on live streams. Yeah, we just moved to
Okay.
this platform, and so we are about a minute away from them.
Oh, geez. Okay.
Yeah,
Okay?
so I just wanted to let you know
Well,
that.
So
thank
we
you
will
so
be
very much.
rescheduling you. We'll have you back, Judge Dan, if you're willing, and
I
and
am
and a
willing,
few months.
and maybe
Okay.
this time I can make it work faster.
You got it down now. Well, sir,
Thank you so much for
please,
having me. It's
please
been an
tell
honor.
people, where they can buy the book and find you.
Amazon.com, barnesandnoble.com, and also ingramspark.com also sells the book. And
Harvest of
we are
Innocence.
within weeks of releasing our audio book, which I'm very excited about because we're using some music that we've licensed for that, which I think is